Hey guys, it's Jack, and welcome back to another Drag Race Quick Bite, or something. It's not even really a quick bite, it's just something that I wanted to do. I am such a sucker for unpopular opinion content, so I decided to bring it to my channel. Shout out Yuki, because I know he's done it before, but he's only done it for specific seasons. I'm rather gonna do it for the entire franchise as a whole. I posted about a week ago in my community tab about this, and you guys, oh my god, you guys filled it up, so there is a lot of opinions. I'm doing about 30 in this video, but if you want a part 2, just let me know. So let's get started. The success of Drag Race España is in part because the show does not cater to an international audience. It's a drag competition for Spanish queens to be mainly enjoyed by a Spanish audience. Personally, I haven't seen Drag Race España yet, partially because of this reason, but it's the same reason why I appreciate the series so much. I've seen amazing clips from both seasons, but it's obviously a show that's not catered to an international audience, and I think that's why it works so well, but it also kind of keeps me from getting into it in the first place. I promise I will, because I know they're both amazing seasons, but I just don't really have the time right now. I do think that the international spin-offs that are hosted by RuPaul, and even some of them that aren't, really do have an international focus to them, and that's kind of what's bringing them down in the end. Things like having an advertising challenge based around Vegemite or calling a song Not Sorry About It, these are things that international viewers will immediately jump to when thinking about these countries, but the actual countries don't really think about this as the main focus of their show or like who they are. Catering to an international audience is great because it can give a lot of viewership to the show, but it also takes a lot of nuance away from the countries. I got a lot of comments about Down Under back when I did my video on Electra Shock, kind of complaining about how the show didn't really emulate their countries at all. And even more so, I think the nuance is doubly lost when RuPaul is judging an international season because he's not going to pick up on a lot of the references. So in challenges like Snatch Game or just kind of the humor overall, RuPaul isn't going to find it funny, but that doesn't mean it's not funny in general. Having a show hosted by RuPaul is going to bring in the international audience and it's catered towards them, but it's also going to bring in the ratings, so that's why they often do it. I hope in the future we do get more spin-offs that are more localized, I guess. I don't really know the right word for it, because I think there's a lot of value in fully enveloping yourself in a culture even if you don't completely get it. The whole ratings and international talk brings me into the next unpopular opinion. The Versus the World season should have minimal amount of US queens on them. I'm in about half agreement with this opinion. When it comes down to opportunities and casting, I think that the US queens do take up spots that could be going to other queens from other countries that don't get them, but at the same time, I do love my US queens and I think that they're gonna bring in the ratings again. People like Mo and Juju both have avid fans like myself, and I'm going to watch the show partially because they're on it. It's true that the US has an All-Stars for just their country, but that's only because they've been around the longest, and I know that there's going to be spin-offs of All-Stars for each country once they get bigger. And when a show is called Versus the World, obviously you have to have the country that the show started out in. And as for the complaint of queens going on that have already been on All-Star seasons, yeah, I do get that complaint too, but here's the thing. Down the line, I know that Canada and UK at least are going to get All-Star seasons just for themselves, so now I look at the Versus the World series as more of a side thing that brings everyone together. As of right now, it looks a little lopsided to have queens who competed on US All-Star seasons competing on this show, but in the future, I think it's going to make more sense. I think in the future, it's going to be looked as an extra lap for queens who already competed on All-Stars coming back for one last try. I think they're going to transition more and more into the idea that they're repping a country, especially with more All-Star seasons coming out for international franchises. So in the future, if there's like a UK All-Stars or a Canada All-Stars, and then we get queens from those seasons coming on Versus the World, it'll make more sense and we'll be like, oh yeah, they're All-Stars who are repping their country for the Versus the World series. I hope my explanation made sense. It makes sense in my head. And one last little thought about it, it's a format that's really interesting to queens who've already been on All-Stars. Someone like Detox said that she was probably never going to compete again, but then she saw the international All-Stars format and then thought about it. It's a way for these US All-Stars to get back in the ring with international people who they may not be interacting with that much. But I do have to acknowledge that yes, overcasting US queens is taking spots away from international queens who don't have an All-Stars for themselves yet. If they want to keep the casting for the US queens pretty high, then just cast more people all around and I think it'll even out a lot better. A lot of Season 7 queens are overlooked, including Jaden Dior Fierce, Candy Ho, and Mrs. Kasha Davis. I would say that a handful of them are the best lip syncers of the franchise as well. I got a lot of comments about Jaden versus Candy being a double Shantae as well, and I think that's true too. I'll get into Season 7 a little more in a second, but let's just talk about the lip syncs because they were really good or really bad. We got amazing lip syncs like Break Free and Roar, but we also got lip syncs like I Really Don't Care. There was a big range in quality for these lip syncs, but Jaden and Candy both turned it every single time. I had the pleasure of meeting Jaden at DragCon and she was so sweet, and I think that both of them could really come back and do well on All Stars. The impact of a lot of the queens on season 7 on social media and just being like some of the biggest queens of all time left a lot of the other queens overshadowed. So I really do agree that we have to acknowledge all the talents of these queens, especially their lip syncs. And more about season 7. Season 7 is overhated and it should really be revisited by a lot of people. I 1000% agree with this, and I think a lot of the season 7 hate comes from a couple factors. I explained a while back that I think in this time frame, WoW was going through an identity crisis. Around this time, they were trying to stick with what worked while also following the trends, and it just ended up clashing a lot. And that's really how we ended up with a really interesting season of season 7. I think I'm going to make this a full video very soon. It didn't help that it came right after season 6, one of the most beloved seasons ever. And around this time, people were treating Bianca's word like gospel, so every time she complained about season 7, it just kind of built on itself and really instilled in the fan base, so a lot of people hated it up until today. Watching it with fresh eyes, yeah, there is a lot of cringe in there like the comment says, but it's still a really quality season of television. I think just like the winner of the season, Violet, this season is going to slowly start to age a lot better. But I'll save the rest of my thoughts for a full-length video. Give this season another shot. The show could do a better job of highlighting the roots of drag, especially to preserve and honor the queens we still have with us today. I completely agree, and I really love the tribute to Hot Chocolate back in the season 14 finale. I think especially in recent years, the show really is swallowing in on itself because it is so successful, but we really do have to appreciate where drag came from, and I think they could do a better job at that. Drag Race has done so much for the popularity of drag in the mainstream, but there's been just as much done behind the scenes for drag as an art form. I really think that there's an inner struggle between showing off a lot of where drag came from while still kind of appealing to people who don't know a lot about it. Like obviously every season we get a reference to Paris is Burning. They did a John Waters challenge, Eureka did Divine on Snatch Game. There were things like the Discomentary, which is kind of technically teaching people about the history of disco, which is adjacent. It partially comes back to the weird state where the show is with its fan base right now. I think there is a very biased liking to younger queens, especially in casting of recent seasons. Like season 14, I think there was Deja, who was like early 30s, which I think she was the oldest contestant, and I don't think that's representative of all the past where drag has come from. There were things like Tamisha in season 13 being like a pillar for an entire family of amazing performers, but it didn't really go anywhere, but I found that so gripping and so interesting. I think there's a lot they could do about bringing past culture in the show without just kind of teaching the children. I think it's clear that Rue is very conscious of not just kind of like wagging her finger at people and being like, this is how we did it back in the day, but I think they could like make challenges from it and be like really fun with it. Something like the John Waters or Discomentary challenge, but even with more of a drag reference. It would be really interesting and again pay appreciation to all the queens that came before the show. This is a good segue into the next unpopular opinion. Drag Race is now merely a vessel through which to worship RuPaul. The constant references to Ru's drag career, to his music, to the Ru prefix for everything, and the comment goes on. I understand where this comment is coming from, and I don't think Drag Race is now merely a vessel. I think it's kind of always been, but that's just also kind of the game you have to play with going on the show. You have to talk about your redemption, you have to talk about the Ru mix, like I can go on. RuPaul is not everything that drag is, and once people get enough into drag, they understand that. Obviously, a lot of people in the community have issues with RuPaul, and they're very valid to have them. To an outsider though, I think RuPaul is a good representation to have for drag in general. Let me explain. For the community itself, I don't think RuPaul embodies a lot of what drag is anymore, just because she's become so successful and so famous. So looking at her from inside the community, it's frustrating, but outside of the community, people like RuPaul a lot. My dad's always been really cool with drag and whatever you want to do, but ever since he's seen like RuPaul on Graham Norton, he loves RuPaul a lot. So I think at the top surface level, for people who don't really know what drag is, RuPaul is good enough representation. She's funny, she's charismatic, she's obviously an insanely good businesswoman, but once you get enveloped into the beauty of drag, you know that RuPaul is not where it stops. I think this one's pretty controversial. Fashion queens that buy their clothes from designers shouldn't be considered fashion queens, especially when compared to queens that make their full wardrobe, Jada for example. I don't really agree with this comment because I think a fashion queen is someone who knows fashion, and just because a designer makes it for them doesn't mean that they aren't fashion queens. There's people like Gigi or Violet who could sew really great garments, but at the same time they could also call designers up and get a really great garment made. In both scenarios, shows they're calling back to their idea of fashion and kind of like their whole Rolodex that they have in their brain. I think a fashion queen is a very broad term. There's fashion queens who can kind of pull out references just by looking at an outfit, and then there's other fashion queens who just have an amazing aesthetic. And I think both are valid traits to be considered a fashion queen. Rita Baga deserves her success and has gotten a completely unfair amount of hate. 1000% yes, I don't understand parts of the fandom that send queens hate for getting wins that they don't think were deserved when the queen doesn't really have control over winning the challenge. Rita did insanely well in the competition off of her own talent regardless of the wins that she got, and I think that people were just mad that the wins weren't going other places because, you know, Canada's Drag Race judging was, you know. Rita was just put into a season with so many fan favorites and she ended up getting overshadowed even though she had the most wins. Hopefully soon though, she gets another chance to do super well in a season. Anyways, moving on. I don't understand why drag kings have never been featured on the show despite having amazing talent. I have faith that we're getting there and we're gonna get a drag king on soon. The amount of hate that I see for drag king performers is far too much because a lot of people are basing their perception of drag based off of the show. It sucks that it has to come down to getting a drag king performer on the show to give them the cookies that they deserve, but it's just kind of where we're at with, you know, online fandoms. I think overall in the media in general, drag kings have just been underrepresented, so the more we can get out of them, the better and more diverse drag will be in the future. My bet is that by season 20, we're gonna have a drag king on, and I'm going to be so excited when that happens. This kind of goes back to a past point. There are way too many young queens on the newer seasons that lack personality and knowledge of drag, and are only there to be pretty and cute and grow their following. I don't like how this one's worded. Yes, there are queens who go on the show that don't have establishment, but that's not to their fault. I think the show just brings a lot of establishment to these queens. The lack of knowledge of drag is a little different. If they're like learning to still perfect their drag, that's okay, but if they don't really know where drag came from, that's a little more of an issue. Obviously now more than ever, I think there's a lot of people that have started to do drag to then just get on Drag Race, and I really think that's where this comment is trying to go with their points. Like I said, I think casting is still neglecting the older generation of queens and we need to get more of them on there, but for the younger generation who may have only started doing drag after watching the show, it's still a valid reason to start doing drag. And here's the thing. The show and casting is going to weed out the queens who aren't ready for the show yet. So you're going to get a lot of these young queens who don't really know drag auditioning, but they're probably not going to get on the show. It's only after actually going up through the ranks of drag then they'll get on the show. There are newer ways that people get cast on the show instead of just being performers, like, you know, social media, but I still think those queens have a valid knowledge and understanding of drag when they go on. And even if people think that some of these queens slip through the cracks and they don't know anything about drag, the show gets them ready and puts them through the ringer and makes them understand afterwards. People just kind of have to accept that Drag Race is a reason for people to start drag now. I mean, it's probably the reason that I'm gonna start drag eventually. Of course, it can't go understated that you have to do your homework and have an understanding going in. Akeria is one of the most underrated queens on the show. She was eliminated way too soon in All Stars, and her performance in the Super Bowl challenge was one of the best. Yes, 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 yes. I am so mad with how Akeria was treated in All Stars 6, and oh, it frustrates me so much because she's always been one of my favorites. I really liked her prince. Even if it wasn't fully embodying him, I do not think it was justified bottom 2 at all. To me, it just really felt like they weren't giving her the time of day on All Stars, which sucks so much. She brings so much fun to every single challenge she's in, and her runways, I mean, the one that she did that she was almost sent home on, just perfection. You're not special if you only stand underrated queens. There's nothing wrong with liking Katya or Trixie. I do agree with this comment, but I also understand why people would disagree with it. Standing underrated queens comes down to either liking them a lot, trying to put respect on their name against more vocal fandoms, or just being a contrarian. The first two reasons are very valid, and I think that just like highlighting a lot of the queens who don't get a lot of the attention is really great. But of course, there's always people who try to uplift their queens by tearing others down, and I just don't understand that. You're free to dislike queens like Katya and Trixie, Bob or Monet, but hating on them, does that really do anything for you? But I also do see it the other way with the fan bases of more popular queens being kind of toxic as well. How about we do something crazy and just like the queens we like without having to tear other people down? It's kind of a concept. Chad Michaels is the most underrated winner because All Stars 1 was basically made for them to win. I do agree that Chad is a really underrated winner. I don't think we hear a lot from her outside of maybe like an All-Stars appearance every once in a while. I mean, like back in season 10, they did the Cher Rusical, and Chad didn't really make an appearance there, which is kind of surprising to me. I do wish we had the timeline now where Chad did win season 4, but All-Stars 1 was a good alternative for Chad. I mean, it's a season that everyone kind of tries to block out, but I don't even think it's honestly that bad. I also don't really think that it was made for Chad to win though. I don't think it was made for anyone to win, to be honest. I know the producers probably did cast Chad, keeping in mind that Chad was probably going to do really well across the season, but again, it was in teams. Some heavy hitters went home early because they were in teams and they didn't really work well in teams, and I think that Chad and Chanel just had like a good chemistry from the start. UK vs. the World is probably the most realistic season of Drag Race we've had. I do agree with this, and I think it's a testament that realism doesn't really make a great season of TV. Before my review was taken down, I talked about how much I loved the strategy on the show, and I still agree with that, but the eliminations, kind of the behavior on the show, it was a little rough to watch. I think in time, like I said earlier, with all-star seasons for each country probably coming out, it's probably not going to hurt as much, but when this is like someone's only shot to compete, and then it's kind of taken away from them when they're doing well in the competition, it just hurts, but that's also the realism that people were talking about. It's honestly really cutthroat and ruthless, and I really appreciate that they did that this season, but sometimes it's just kind of hard to go back and watch. I don't like people's dreams being taken away from them, but if it's the name of the game, I respect the gameplay. And I do agree that people who don't respect the strategy are hypocritical. I think they'll tell you this or that and be like, oh my god, I love this so much, until it happens to one of their favorites, and you can't really have it both ways. The show has been changing into a different type of show, and the fanbase and target audience have changed a lot. It feels like production is working against the queens rather than with them. Obviously, I do think that the show has changed and the target audience has changed just because of the age we live in. The online fandom is a very, very large fan base, so catering and appealing to them to keep the show on the air is smart of them to do. I think expecting the show to stay the same or the audience to stay the same is kind of wishful thinking. Everything, especially a show that's been on for 10 plus years, is going to change a lot. Compromises are going to have to be made, and if you want the show to stay on, you just kind of have to deal with them. The comment goes on to say that they feel like there's less effort in like making an entertaining show. Things like they aren't given enough rehearsal time or enough coaching. But the thing is, we have seen instances on like the main show, the main US show, where they have been given more rehearsal time, like with Moulin Rouge, and we saw that that turned out great. So I think that giving them more rehearsal time will always make a better product, but here's the thing. Less rehearsal time means more potential mess-ups in the challenge, which means that they could put people on the bottom more easily. Bosco and Georges were the worst in the challenges, but they weren't bad at all because they had time to practice. It's easier for production to create a narrative out of people messing up, and the best way to do that is to create conflict, and the best way to create conflict is to give them like less rehearsal time or just not enough time to refine it. Obviously, it's a little shady, but that's just reality TV for you. The way Maddy Morphosis was treated on season 14 was hard to watch. I agree that it was really hard to watch. It was kind of weird that they were trying to out the straight contestant on the show. Like, isn't that kind of hypocritical coming from the community who has more potential to get outed? Of course, it was a safe space, so I wasn't worried for Maddy or anything, but it really felt like she was an accessory to them, and I don't like that a lot. It kind of felt like they were expecting her to be this like fish out of water straight guy, as if she hasn't been like an established queen for a while now. Maddy knows her shit and she's outspoken about it, and I think that's perfect. And what's great is in the reunion, they gave her that time, and it really shows that everyone was really well received about Maddy, and Maddy's probably going to come back and do really well on All Stars. Queens like Yvie and Willow only have one win because production still doesn't know how to celebrate alternative drag, but still wants to crown them. I do get where this comment is going, but I think that there's always been alternative drag that has been celebrated on Drag Race all the way back to like season 1. Raja did bring a form of alternative drag to a lot of her runways. She was a club kid, and of course, I mean, we did have Sharon, who was pretty alternative, and they did highlight that. But if we're talking about like the specific style that Yvie and Willow have, I guess it hasn't been highlighted as much, but I think it's more of a coincidence that they only both ended up with one win rather than like them not really knowing how to celebrate it, because I feel like we did get a lot of celebration for Yvie's style of drag back on season 11, especially when put against someone like Silky or Brooke. I think it just comes down to production not really knowing how to give wins out for an overarching story, but I'd rather have them give out wins in the moment rather than they play like an endgame or something, you know? Queens aren't always going to be Miss Congeniality, and fans who try to act shady towards the queens are just mean. For the first part, I do agree to a certain extent. I don't know why we expect all these queens to be so nice. It's like they're coming on a show to like express their art rather than be this amazing person, but at the same time they are also going on a show and they want to highlight like the good parts about themselves, and being nice it takes you a long way. It's great to see great personalities on TV, but even if they don't completely translate in real life, that doesn't mean that they're a terrible person, and we shouldn't expect them to be this amazing, uplifting person all the time. As for the second part, I don't understand why these fans can be so, quote, shady to these queens. It's just, they're really mean. The fact that Trixie has to come out on social media and say to not call her a fat, bald, or F-slur, where do these fans get off, honestly? It's part of the culture to be shady or read each other, but it starts with the fact that they're peers, and people who are fans, they're not peers, I'm sorry to say. Queens can tell stories of fans being shady and it's funny, but it doesn't give you a free ticket to also be shady to them because a lot of the time it just comes off as mean. You gotta have an understanding of each other going in, and if you don't have that, there's just like a disconnect and it comes off so wrong. Production should give each queen they cast an allowance so they can purchase things towards their looks before filming the season. The show makes a lot of money, let's be honest, it does, and they can fully afford this, maybe cast like one less queen so they could give more money to each of these queens. I completely agree with this. We know that it's very expensive to go on Drag Race now, and I think some of the queens just can't afford it, but they still are amazing performers, they're not great on the runway because they don't have the money. There are insanely crafty queens, but sometimes your talents just don't lie in that, so partially it comes down to a pay-to-win system. An allowance would just create such an equal playing field and allow for all the runways to be amazing. It's not the same, but it's kind of similar. On All-Star 7, they dropped the luggage limit, which allowed for the queens to bring a lot more intricate and amazing looks for the season. The fashion on Drag Race is amazing, but the restrictions they have in place now are hindering it from getting even better. The Rock would win an early out season for sure. I 1000% agree. I love Rock. I got to talk to her at DragCon for a little bit. She's so funny, so smart, and she would dominate. I really thought that she was gonna dominate season 12. She makes some of the best YouTube content. She's one of the funniest, most quick queens, and I'm glad that she's getting the hype now and always kind of has been, even though her time on season 12 was so short. I have a vivid memory of texting one of my friends after she was eliminated, kind of being in disbelief, like, no, they're gonna bring her back because like they're gonna do like a bring back challenge like on season 7 and it's gonna be fine. But then they didn't, and I was really sad. In the recent seasons, I think we're getting a better showcase of the early outs, but I think Rock is still just so good, and I really think that she would dominate. Mimi on First was unfairly attacked on All Stars 1, and I kind of feel bad watching it back. It was iconic, but so insanely edited, and it makes no sense watching it back. The whole fight and the justification behind it was fueled by hate for Mimi from the past. I really think that if this happened to anyone else, people would be a lot more upset about it. I've heard really mixed things about working with Mimi, and I think that's very valid, but just the fight itself, I don't think it should have happened. Alexis was mad because Mimi took over a job that she previously had, but Mimi didn't know that she had this job, and she's not gonna like resign from it because, you know, she has to put food on the table for herself and like live somewhere. Alexis had the right to feel some type of way, but the rest of the girls just went in on her for no reason. It was a little shady to bring up past conflict on TV, and Mimi called that out, and then they were like, well, guess what, Mimi? We did. It becomes this whole lopsided thing about Mimi being number 3rd in the voting, and it just really doesn't make sense because they were all ganging up on her, and then they were like, well, guess what? Wow, the old Mimi is back. And it's like, no, she's upset because you guys are all hating on her. If I know Mimi enough in her past fight with Shangela, I feel like this was played up for the cameras, but it just came off as mean-spirited. Blank should have won X season is a stupid argument. I 1000% agree with this. I think fan bases are grown and money is made regardless of if you have a crown on your head or not. No one should be tearing winners down because they don't have a say in if they win or not. They just win the show and it's great for them, but tearing them down, like, what does that do for you? Sometimes people get so involved with their favorites that they forget that there's other people doing well on the seasons and they should appreciate everyone on the season. Instead of being in disbelief for years that Gigi Good didn't win season 12, go back and watch why Jada won the season and appreciate Gigi for just being a great queen and also Jada for being a great queen. Okay, and the final opinion of the video, I'm not going to read it all because it goes in kind of hard. RuPaul is not the best performer as of right now. She's getting up there in age, we know this, but I think RuPaul has proved herself as a performer beforehand, so if she wants to perform on her show, she can, and it just might not be like what fans are expecting. To me, I have fun with performances and I just try to enjoy them because I think Ru is enjoying herself. Obviously, it's like promo for her music and everything. Like, just let her do this because obviously she has the show to do it on. If you want to make memes or jokes about it, obviously you can, but regardless of what happens, I mean, she's getting the check at the end of the day. The comic goes on to say that because Ru doesn't do her own makeup, hair, or clothes, it's kind of weird that she's judging the show, but I don't agree with that. I think that she's done her hair, makeup, and clothes for so long that she's made it to the the point where she doesn't need to do it anymore. It's common in a lot of competition reality shows for judges to not be like 1000% ready to compete for their show, but you know, they're there for a reason. Rue's climbed the ranks for years to get where she's at now, so obviously she's gonna have the luxuries of not doing her makeup or anything if she wants that. But she still had that past and understanding, and that's honestly more than you can say for a lot of judges on a lot of shows. I'm gonna call it there because this video is getting a little long. Thank you guys for watching. If you want another part, I totally will make another part because this was really fun to do. Leave some more unpopular opinions in the comments below. Follow me on all of my social media and make sure you're subscribed to my channel. Some people are getting unsubscribed for some reason and it sucks. I'll see you guys soon with another video.